You were at Buffer for almost 7 years. And Buffer was a product led motion, was it?
It was, yeah. We didn't have any sales team, so everything came through marketing and product.
So now, in hindsight, what can you tell me about like what worked really well for marketing, and on the flip side, what were some things that did not work?
Yeah, so 7 years ago, the concept of product-led growth didn't really exist. So we were doing
Hmm.
this thing, but didn't have a name for it. And I guess what I've learned since then is it's really important to connect your go-to-market motion with your channels and your channel strategy. And so since we were product-led growth, we relied on a lot of organic growth, a lot of virality, word of mouth, a lot of these triggers that came from the product to get more acquisition back into the funnel. And for us, that ended up being the organic side ended up being a lot through content marketing. We were lucky to be somewhat early in the content marketing game, and so built a pretty strong moat around our SEO and thought leadership work. There was a bit of category creation that happened at that stage too. Like the concept of social media for businesses was so new and nascent. There was a lot of pent up demand for how do you understand, how to be on Facebook as a business when Facebook had always meant like having your own profile and things like that. And so we had a lot of education to be done, which meant a lot of keyword volume to go after, and just a lot of ways that content could show up in those cases. And so it was also
How
like a
many
nice,
articles were you shipping at a time?
yeah. So I was brought on to kind of build out the go to market engine. So it was just me, the solo marketer, and I would write 4 2,000 word posts a week for the blog.
Wow,
So we did, 150, 200 a year the first couple of years. Pretty high volume,
pretty high volume, yeah.
and it was fun. It worked.
hmm what else worked besides producing blog articles?
Yeah, so we had a really strong brand, which often seems like very much like art when we're talking growth and PLG and all these different things. But for brand for us, it showed up in our word of mouth acquisition. So, for every one customer we attracted, we could do the math and see how many customers that person would bring in for us. We had some attribution modeling once you got into the product, once like in the sign up flow. So word of mouth was really big for us. And then the brand also was really key for things like direct traffic, referral traffic. And so we just had a lot of like free traffic coming to the site. And then it did become kind of an exercise in conversion rate optimization and driving folks toward activation and upsell. And so as a marketing team, we were responsible for signups. And so we had, 7 million users over my time there. Then getting those signups to convert into paying plans was where a lot of our effort and focus went as well. So we kind of operated both like pre and post sign up in a way.
How did this brand come to be? So, if one wanted to start building their brand from scratch today, what would you advise them to focus on?
Yeah, there's a lot of different pieces to it. First and foremost, why do you exist as a brand, as a product, as a business? So being really, really key about why you exist, what makes you different, what problem are you solving? Being really consistent in how you talk about that answer to like the why question. And then ideally you're connecting that why to some larger tension out in the market, because I can have a why for building a business today, but if it doesn't matter to anyone but me, then the business isn't going to go very far. So it's connecting that why to some sort of tension or zeitgeist moment happening in the market itself. From there, then you're able to kind of build out your brand purpose, your brand personality, your brand stories. So we go through an exercise we call them like story structures, where you have this kind of hero story at the top, but then 4 complementary stories that kind of filter back up into that bigger hero story. You can take those stories. Maybe one story is fit for this persona, one story is better for this persona, one story is better for a persona that won't exist for 5 years, but you got to plant that seed today. And so just being very deliberate about the stories that you tell underneath that why umbrella, which sounds all very vague, but I think like once that why is clear, the rest of the pieces start to fall into place of what that looks like.
Can you give me a specific example of a story you crafted, and then how did you tell that story, and what channels did you use?
Yeah. So at Oyster, we have the story structure, and we have the top stories about creating equal opportunities for folks around the world when it comes to employment. Oyster is a global employment platform. And so this type of employment is better for people, it's better for the planet, it's better for businesses. So that's the hero story. One of the stories underneath that then is all about the value of looking beyond your existing talent pools to find talent elsewhere, and what that can do for what that can unlock for a business. And so that leads to telling stories around global hiring. It leads to telling stories about the talent acquisition kind of war that has happened over the last couple of years in terms of the bigger zeitgeist of remote work and the bigger zeitgeist of the Great Resignation. And so it connects to those bigger narratives through a story that ultimately builds up to this bigger picture for us at Oyster around global employment.
Now, Oyster is not the only one telling that story. Your dear competitors, or Deal, or Remote, or whoever else is there. They could be saying similar things, and maybe even are saying the exact same things. So, what are your thoughts on that? Like, should your story be differentiated?
It should be differentiated for sure. I think it's interesting to always go back to that why. So, for instance, the why for Oyster is we're doing this work in order to create a more equal world. And so, a lot of our story and messaging differentiates itself based on that mission. It differentiates based on the type of impact that we want to have in the world. So, some of our other stories are around things like ESG is one of the storylines that we have, and so environmental, social governance, policy kind of things. Some of it is more around like the work-life balance for folks and the global workforce and what it's like from their perspective, versus maybe a company like Deal, which is more about kind of the financial flexibility and freedom of this type of approach to things. It's very much, you even see them listed as like a fintech company in a lot of ways, and we would never at Oyster list ourselves as a fintech company. And so we're going after kind of the same problem space, but coming at it from different angles. I think that's where the brand really comes alive, and the market can start to distinguish some of these things in that sense.
Hmm. So there is the Simon Sinek. People care about why you do it, not what you do, or whatever. First, they need to care about the why, and then the what. I personally have always believed that in B2B, it's mostly bullshit. Because I don't know, have you ever bought a CRM because of why they do it? I don't even know why they do it, and also, frankly, don't care. So, do you think your buyer cares about your company's mission?
I absolutely do. Yeah. I think that B2B marketing is a shell for like B2C marketing. Like the best B2B marketing is B2C marketing in a way, because you're selling to people at the end of the day. Someone once told me that an RFP process, so request for proposal, kind of the checklist that bigger companies go through when they're making vendor selections, an RFP process is simply justification for an emotional decision that you've already made. And so if I can get to that point of someone knows my brand, someone's connected with what we're talking about, they need our solution, they're sold, and the RFP is just like, I don't know, it's just that last justification step to get there. That's kind of how
So,
I approach it.
let's imagine. So there's a company out there, and they're like, looking at different options, including
Yeah.
Oyster and some alternatives. Is the internal conversation is like, I really feel moved by the mission, and that's why I think we should go with Oyster? Or is it they never mention it? It's on the inside. They say, no, look at their features and whatever the capabilities and the pricing, and so the why is never actually not discussed, but it's like the internal motivator, or is it discussed that like this guy has a better mission? So
No, we don't expect him to discuss it. I wouldn't go to my CFO and be like, I want to spend 50,000 on this software because they're a B Corp or something like that. Like, that'd be great. That'd be great. I don't think that conversation would go very well, but I think it's more about that. Like, you're so bought into this brand that you're willing to tell that story to your CFO in a way that you kind of become a salesperson for the brand. In a sense, you become that advocate. And it's not necessarily about, like, what the CFO cares about, so you mention those things, but you personally know there's no other option here. Like, it has to be this brand, and I'll find a way to make it happen.
mhm. uh, let's go back to the history. So at Buffer, heavy on content marketing, heavy on brand and the why. doing category creation, I guess, through evangelization, and explaining why. Were there any other important pieces to the marketing engine?
Yeah, those were our biggest ones for sure. So acquisition for us was content marketing and word of mouth. We also had a community play that we ran. So this was initially through something as simple as like a Twitter chat, back when Twitter chats were had a decent sized volume and attendance to them. And so that lasted for a while. We sequenced from that into a Slack community. So we had a good community base there, which also fit kind of the content marketing and word of mouth growth loops as well. And then we had those are the main ones. I think PR was maybe the last one, which is also kind of content adjacent. And PR for us was about a means of syndicating our content to get it in front of more people. It was about telling some of our brand stories. So through some of the unique things we did, like we had transparent salaries, we had transparent revenue dashboards, all these kind of unique things. But then also telling the story of the product and the story of like some of the impact that we wanted to have in the world too. And so PR was a really helpful lever. We had PR in house, which is something I
Hmm.
highly recommend if you can swing it, because you get to know the brand in such a strong way that you can tell that story in a much more compelling way.
And so PR was done in like actual like magazines and publications, or how was it done?
Yeah, we got our founder on a couple of covers, which was nice, but more so it was through digital media. So sites like Forbes and Time and Fast Company, places like that was where we tried to get it. We had a couple goals, like Entrepreneur Magazine, I think was one of them. New York Times was one of them, but those were maybe once or twice a year. It was more of the drumbeat of the digital stuff that helped us grow.
And when you say if you can swing it, meaning that hiring PR people is very expensive, or
It's much easier to go external for that early and to just hire for other roles, and so it becomes almost like an opportunity cost exercise. Like if you have one person on your team, would you rather have, I don't know, a growth marketer or an ops person or something like that, or a PR person? And PR is an easier tends to be an easier skill to outsource to agencies and things like that. But you lose a little bit in making that call.
so today you're at Oyster. You've been there almost 2 years, and is this a sales led motion there?
It is a sales led motion. Yes, I was brought in to help introduce some product led components. So if you come to our website, you can see you can get started for free, but most of the revenue does come from sales. Yeah.
So what are the key differences in how the marketing machine is set up?
Yeah, it's almost night and day different from Buffer to Oyster, which I have found really interesting and a fun puzzle. So at Buffer, we didn't raise much money. We went more a sustainable route, and we're a profitable business for my last 4 or 5 years there. At Oyster, we've raised a ton of money. We've been on the hyper growth VC backed path, which gives you access to different resources and also different goals and targets as well. And so for us, we have built out a very predictable inbound demand gen engine, half through paid channels, so paid search and paid social, and the other half through organic channels, so content, word of mouth, again PR. So some of the similar Buffer playbook um, at Oyster, but it's very much balanced with that paid side. So paid search and paid social are a really big portion of what we do. We also do quite a bit of events at Oyster, and so that's kind of a bridge between both the paid and non-paid side. Like they obviously cost a lot, but we do a lot of interesting brand stuff and activation stuff there as well. And so it's a totally different mix because of the different type of business that Oyster is.
Is content still on the blog for SEO, or is it like LinkedIn organic or social media?
Yeah, I love that question because content, I can often get locked into content as a blog post. And so, yes, we have a blog at Oyster, but the biggest contributions from content for us, they come from our PR and our thought leadership, which is we have 4 or 5 ambassadors within our company on LinkedIn. So if you go and see our CEO's presence on LinkedIn or our co-founder's presence, it's huge, expansive stuff, posting, 4 or 5 times a week on all sorts of different topics, and gets tons and tons of traction for the brand. So that's been our biggest content play. We also have a podcast. We've dabbled in video, but primarily it's the social media and thought leadership stuff with the PR that's given us the biggest traction.
And that LinkedIn organic thought leadership, is that repurposed into blog post later? Are you doing anything with it after the publishing?
We haven't done too much of that yet. Sometimes the LinkedIn stuff is a bit more reactive to trends, so it's not doesn't
Mhm.
lend itself necessarily to evergreen content. But we've started to stand up kind of a building in public portion of our blog content, which is taking some of the stuff we do share on LinkedIn. Maybe it's not from the CEO, but it's from our chief people officer, since we're kind of a people ops tech product,
Mhm.
bringing that into the blog and telling those stories in a longer form way.
And the paid channels, are we talking like Google search, or is it LinkedIn heavy? Where are you acquiring the paid ad customers from?
Yep. So we do paid search and paid social. Paid search is 90 to 99% Google. We do a little bit of Bing, but it's mostly Google there. And on the paid social side, it's very much LinkedIn is our primary there. We've also dabbled into Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, but LinkedIn is the primary one for us.
In your experience, what does your ACV need to be at to do LinkedIn ads profitably?
Yeah, LinkedIn has been a journey for us. We've even, we've backed it up sometimes till almost like the super top of funnel level as well, because it wasn't converting as well in the middle or bottom of funnel. And we've tweaked things, we've rearranged things, we've gone more of like a account-based marketing model where you kind of have multi-touch attribution to contribute to see what LinkedIn's contribution was. And so I don't know that there's one single answer for where you need to be to make LinkedIn work. It kind of depends on how you're using LinkedIn. But in my experience, 15,000 to 20,000 is typically where I would start before really investing in LinkedIn, because it does have a longer payback and costs a bit more to really get traction there.
So, how big of a role in Oyster's growth does timing play? So, you guys got started, and then the pandemic happened, and nobody planned for it.
Yeah.
And then just kind of like the changes in the macro environment carried you, and maybe still carrying you. So, how would you quantify the impact of timing here?
Oh, timing is everything. I think timing has been everything in my career. I feel very lucky to have landed where I landed when I landed there. I think timing has been everything for the companies that I've been part of too. Getting started at Buffer, which was early in the social media space, getting started at Oyster, which is early in the global employment space. I think it's huge. I think at Oyster it's been interesting to see the timing even over my 2 years of being there. And so I joined, mid pandemic when everyone was still working remotely, and then you've had. I think what that showed was that remote work existed before the pandemic, of course, but once everyone was forced to do it, you kind of saw that this actually can work at scale. It can work for a variety of businesses, and maybe even my business that I hadn't thought of before. And so it kind of opened everyone's eyes to the possibility. And then you kind of saw this kind of return to work mode. You saw also like the macroeconomic stuff, which reduced hiring, which is obviously a key fuel for a global employment company. You need companies that are hiring people. And so timing has been great. It's been bad. It's been okay. I feel like I've seen like 5 different versions of timing within this business. But I think to go back to like the start of the business, this business started before the pandemic with the understanding this is where the world is going eventually. Like I think the world got there a lot faster than we thought, and the world is still headed and trending in that direction. And that's kind of the longer term belief that gets us motivated and helps us see a rosy path ahead still.
So, this category of yours, I don't even know what do you call it? Remote employment or
We named it global employment.
global employment? Okay, yeah. So, global employment category, I'm guessing is growing fast.
Yes.
And so, do you still worry about like helping to expand the category? So, most of your efforts are directed at evangelizing the category and defining the category, or are you already thinking about differentiation and positioning against the competitors and things like that?
Yeah. I think we have to do both. So I think we have to do both category education expansion plus differentiation. And even choosing a category name is a way of, I guess it's a way of doing both. Like you're differentiating with the name that you identify as, you're differentiating with the way that you describe and define that category. As an example, within our space of helping companies hire people from anywhere, you can hire people either as full-time employees or you can hire them as contractors. And so by us choosing the name of global employment, we are kind of planting a flag in the sand of saying we believe full-time employment is what we do best, and it's what we believe in long term, versus some of our competitors, which are building out more of like a contractor feature set, going to market more with the contractor messaging. So it's been really interesting to see how the choice of a category name can kind of differentiate you in a way and to dictate some of that. I think naturally you're going to see, tons more growth in this space, regardless of what you call it. But what's really important for us is that we're clear in what people should expect from a global employment platform. And so as part of that, it's that education process of when you are standing up a people operations team, you need an HRIS system like a Workday. You need an ATS like a Greenhouse. You need an ERP like a NetSuite. And you need a GEP, which is our acronym for Global Employment Platform, which is something like us. And you kind of show them this world in which these are the four things you need. This is how they complement one another. And that's ideally the foundation that you're setting for people to kind of frame you in relation to everything else. So huge amount of education around that piece. But then we're also hopeful a lot of differentiation comes out of us being clear about what that category means.
So when you look back at the previous 2 years at Oyster, I'm sure you've learned a lot compared to your day one at the job. So
Yes.
what are the more surprising things that you learned, and where are some things that you got wrong, like bets that didn't pay off or things like that?
Yeah, so many in both buckets. I think one of the things that we had to do at Oyster, given how fast we were growing, is to hire ahead of need and to sequence faster than you thought you might need to sequence. And that has gone really well in some cases, and it has gone not so well in other cases. Like I think my default state would be to validate a channel or validate a strategy before you go out and fully resource it with bringing in headcount or spending a lot of extra money on it. And we didn't really have that luxury here. It was like, capital is available. This was a couple of years ago when it was easier to raise money potentially, but capital is available. The opportunity is here. The timing is right. Let's go for it. And so, we built out some channels that didn't end up paying dividends and had to repurpose some of those resources in other ways. But we also were able to sequence into channels like events and like podcasting that did really well for us and helped us, get to this next stage. And so I think anytime you're doing this type of work at the pace that we're doing it, you're going to have some hits and you're going to have some misses. And I think it's what you do, what you learn in both cases that becomes really important. And so on the hits, how do you learn what happened well there and do more of it? On the misses, how do you learn what you missed and how do you correct that by, redistributing resources, pointing people in different directions, kind of owning that outcome. So that's like some high level stuff. More tactically speaking, since we had such strong paid foundations, how do we get more scale and more efficiency out of those channels? And so for us, that's things like hiring more operations folks to help us build out the lead funnel in a more robust and disciplined way. It's sequencing to different types of ads on paid search and paid social. It's even sequencing to different channels, like going from LinkedIn to YouTube, as an example, different media types. So how do you build that sequencing roadmap within a channel like that? Mm-hmm. And then how do you evolve the rest of your strategy to match all these like changing dynamics in the macroeconomic picture too? So like we spent, you go to SaaStr, you spend $250,000 to do some big splashy thing at SaaStr to get brand awareness, but then what if $250,000 is a lot of money all of a sudden, which it is for pretty much everyone? Like you have to rethink that event strategy from scratch and be like, am I okay showing up in a big way here? And what opportunity cost comes from that if I have to say no to something else? Am I okay with that? Or do I use that $250,000 to go sponsor five $50,000 events? And so we had to really completely redo an event strategy. Some of our bigger budget line items, we had to really rethink those to get them in a good spot.
Are you guys sponsoring, or were you sponsoring a lot of events?
We had a pretty healthy sponsorship calendar, yeah, and I think it was initially a lot to get our name out there. Like I've been at Oyster 2 years. Oyster's been around 2.5 years, and so like both Oyster and I were very new to this whole thing, and so getting our name out there was really key. And then like more recently, been about how do we get the ROI out of this event? How do we make sure it's worth it? And I think those are two, you end up in two very different places if you're trying to solve for each of those things.
I hear from a lot of demand gen leaders today that demand gen or demand acquisition channels are just getting too costly, too competitive. Are you feeling that? And if so, what are you doing about it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're competing against companies that have hundreds of millions in funding. And so I think our space is hot and our competition is fierce. And it requires more of a long-term lens with this stuff. And so I'm advocating for us doubling down on brand activities as an example, because this again is something I care a lot about and I think does help you win in the short, medium, and long term when you have that uniqueness about your brand and that resonance with the brand. And so sometimes that means running campaigns that are a bit more maybe messaging focused and more focused on your core value rather than just trying to pay as much as you can to get more leads in the door. It's like being more focused about who is our precise ICP, what are the things they care about, how does that connect to our brand. Let's be fully focused on this group. Let's not get distracted by the excess. I think it's less of a land grab mindset, which might have been relevant a couple of years ago, and more of a like land ownership mindset. Like I know where I want to live. I know where I want to be. Let's make sure that we're doing the best we can to show up there. And so it requires a lot of discipline, but I think it's necessary and worth it in this demand gen landscape.